Festiwal Sektor 3.0 trwa w najlepsze. Witamy Państwa w kolejnym bloku tematycznym, w bloku, w którym będziemy rozmawiać o tym, jak w internecie można szukać informacji, jak te informacje znajdować, a przede wszystkim jak znajdować te dobre informacje, te, którym można wierzyć. Zapraszamy na rozmowę, no i oczywiście na kolejne bloki związane z naszym festiwalem Sektor 3.0. All right. Hello. I would like to thank you very much for joining us.
Happy to be on.
I'm joined here by Eliot Higgins, founder and creative director in Bellingcat. And we have to start here, I think. Bellingcat is the home of online investigations. Can you talk a little bit about the background, the fundamental idea behind your initiative, how it's going?
So we really live in a fundamental shift in how information is shared and accessed. The old models of top-down gatekept communication is really shifting to more of a peer-to-peer, many-to-many model. And I think the first real impact of that was the Arab Spring. And that's where I started encountering videos coming from places like Libya and Syria, but also the online debates about these videos, which weren't really based off facts or analysis. They were based off people's biases and opinions. And I found that rather frustrating. So I started trying to figure out how you could verify if these videos were true, where they were filmed, when they were filmed, and developed a number of techniques to do that and started writing about that. And after a couple of years, I founded Bellingcat as an organization to show other people how to do that and also create a space for people to come and do those investigations. And a really big part of that work is the communities that grow online around these different topics. So we're trying to educate people, we're trying to give them the space to come together and investigate things, and we're publishing investigations on a whole range of different topics using publicly available information that's accessible to anyone on the internet.
Was it a surprise that there are so many people like you that want to verify information, that want to know the truth?
It was more of a relief than a surprise, I would say. I think sometimes it's very easy to fall into this trap of thinking that everyone's just mad at each other on the internet and that's all people are interested in. But it's always been really great for me as we've grown as an organization over the last 10 years, seeing more and more people who are really drawn to open source investigation because it helps establish the truth rather than helps reinforce their opinions. And for me, that's really important because we do live in a society now where it's very easy to have your opinions and biases reinforced rather than have them challenged. But it's really important, I think, for democratic societies to have those discussions, to make sure they're inclusive discussions and make sure they're based off, as much as possible, verified information rather than people's biases, opinions, and feelings.
It's probably the best and the worst time to gather information, or for being online even. Can I get your take on that? Because it's the best because we have so much knowledge that we can share and that we can just take and, and digest. But also it's the same with disinformation and things that are bad for you. It's quite tricky and quite complicated, I think.
Yeah, I think one issue we're facing is this new information that we now kind of exist in is that the system is very much based around rewarding engagement rather than the truth. So naturally, people are driven towards creating content that is really about building, an audience and creating engagement, and often that's emotionally engaging rather than truthful. And the thing is, this isn't happening in a structure where there's only a few people doing this. There's millions of people who are engaged with this all the time. And it's not just about the big accounts who are trying to get engagement. The act of resharing something that isn't true is something that millions of people do every single day. And that's not because they believe it's false and they're sharing it because it's false. It's because it reinforces their opinions and they think their opinions are right. And the problem is when that's happening at scale in a networked and algorithmically informed and driven way, that starts dividing people into really different bubbles of reality, that their version of reality is constantly being reinforced, and anything outside of that bubble is seen as, a kind of, a denial of reality, because they believe they live in reality rather than a bubble of information that creates reality. But that's always existed. We've always had information that's given to us. But rather than, the old system was it came from the media, newspapers, it came through a kind of elite control system that was imperfect, but it at least had some checks and balances within it in terms of, for example, editorial control, legal requirements. Now, because everyone becomes not only just a publisher, but also a distributor, that structure that exists. And for me, that's really about creating values in the communities around the importance of the truth. But the truth isn't just inherently valuable. You actually have to make sure there's action based off the truth, because without that action, it just drives the cynicism that draws people into those communities that reinforces their own biases.
Do you think that we know about the bubbles, or it should be common knowledge because no one is really hiding it, but we don't really pay attention to it? We don't want to see really something that is, outside of our bubble, outside of our view of the world. So do you think that people are more aware, should be more aware, or are not aware at all?
I think it's a mix. I think one thing that often happens is, even if you're aware of the bubbles, you often think, oh, it doesn't affect me though, because I'm too smart to be drawn into a bubble. But in a way, everyone's in their own bubble. But it's really the approach you have in, engaging with information. I've developed this model of disordered discourse, which explains how we're drawn into discourse that is fundamentally based off false information. And there's stages to this where, all of us are seeking information about stuff on the internet. We have questions, we go out and we seek it, and then we engage with this information. And it could be, clicking on a link, watching a video. But the problem is, it depends on the drivers of why you're engaging with that information. It's very easy to say, oh, this information is just Russia or, some state lying to us and influencing people's opinions. But really, there's a lot of complex drivers that draw people into communities that do believe in disinformation. And they really do believe this stuff because it reinforces their own biases, which are built upon their life experience. So, if you look at the conflicts in Syria, for example, a lot of people who deny the use of chemical weapons there are drawing on the experience of Iraq in 2003, when there was a kind of false case for war built by the US and UK government and the US and UK media for invading Iraq. So that informs the way they interact and engage with the information that they discover. And the problem is that tends to reinforces the biases and opinions they already have. And you then see a kind of group identity forming around these ideas that turns into an institutionalized view of the world, where you have certain websites, individuals who are kind of leading the narratives, the discourse around these topics, and also policing it. So if you say, oh, maybe, Assad did use chemical weapons, those communities who deny it will attack you, they will push you out of the communities. And eventually that becomes what I call discourse absolutism, where the entire view of the world that you have is seen through the lens of the discourse of the community. That even if it's not relevant to that original topic, there is a set of beliefs and values that have been created that informs how you interact with information in the future. So really what we have to do is look at how we stop that form of disordered discourse forming. And that, for me, is really about having healthier democratic discourse that isn't just about shouting at people on the internet. It's saying, how do we come together? How do we find a common understanding if we may disagree on the politics of something? And how do we actually take action around that in a way that benefits the most people as possible?
Right. I want to talk about the digital footprint, because it's almost as the same as the bubble. We know about it, and we know that we are not anonymous online, but the investigations that you are pursuing on your side, sometimes the smallest detail is like a clue. Yeah. So it's true that everything we do online, it just stays there and can be found.
Even stuff that you wouldn't think ever becomes public can become very useful. So we've just done an investigation into a website called Mr. Deepfake, which is a website that allows people to share non-consensual deepfake pornography. This includes celebrities, private individuals, public people like journalists, for example. And it's a really unpleasant phenomenon that's emerged from this AI-led deepfakery. We've recently identified the person who runs the website, who's been trying to keep his identity secret. And part of that was possible because he was using the same a password across multiple accounts on different websites. And a lot of these websites ended up being hacked and massive data breaches being dumped. And there's now organizations who collect all these data breaches and make them available through tools that we use. So if we find one account related to the person, we can find the password and then find every single other account associated with that password. Now, I'm sure he never thought his passwords would be available online, but because they were, it allowed us to connect this whole network of information together. And that's just one very tiny example of how your digital footprint can exist online that probably most people don't even think about when they're, typing in their passwords. It's another good reason to use different passwords across multiple accounts. But yeah, there's so many different ways that you can kind of leave traces online. Even, a friend taking a photograph of you at an event may be a way for people to kind of identify who you are. It's certainly something we've been very successful at in the past.
All right. We have to jump into the sources of information. How can we use those available effectively? How can we check if something is true or not? Well, it's a really big question, but I'm sure you have some tips.
Yeah, for us, it's really about triangulating as much information as possible. So you might have a video or photograph, but by itself, it may not have a lot of value as of evidence. It may make a claim, but that's why we have processes like geolocation, where we use information within the image, objects, items, buildings, to help actually find the exact location based off other sources such as satellite imagery or other reference imagery of the same area. We have the idea of chronolocation, which is establishing the time and date an image was taken. So, for example, if you know where a photograph was taken exactly, you can use shadows that are visible to find the time of day. You can compare it to other sources to establish a date. So there's different ways to establish information about an image based off what's already in the image using other sources. But if there is an incident, it kind of creates ripples online, digital ripples that we start trying to identify. It could be as 50 separate accounts have posted something about an incident, but once you collect that all together, you can start comparing, the images, the statements, the claims, the allegations, and start looking at them together. So it's really about kind of building a network of information around the topic, be it a organization, an event, or just an image.
All right. I really like the resources on your website. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this. There is an article, How to Spot AI Scams, when someone is selling something online and it's fake. It's all generated. So that's only the first thing that comes to my mind. But there is more, right? So this is like another resource for people to, to look up to.
Yeah. So we have always on Bellingcat been very transparent about our methodologies, and that includes investigations where we kind of go step by step on how we do the investigation, but also case studies and resources that may focus on a type of investigation or a specific tool, so people can learn how to do that themselves. We're very big on making sure that as many people are doing this as possible because we see there's a lot of value in that. One major thing we have now is the Bellingcat Toolkit. So there are lots and lots of different tools that are used in lots of types of investigations. And unless you're someone who has a lot of experience, it's hard to know what all of them are. So we now have a toolkit which has a large language model driven search engine where we've basically, for each tool, we've written up how it works and lots of details about it. And the large language model can be asked a question and it will help you identify the tools that are best for the problem that you have. So it's really about reducing the barrier of entry between the tools and being able to discover and access them, and then having the understanding on how to apply them to an investigation. So we're constantly producing tools, resources, and other ways to get the community involved. We also have a Discord server, has about 30,000 members on it, where people come together and can work on investigations and just stuff that's interesting to them. So we also create spaces for people to come together and apply their knowledge.
Do you have something that is so universal and versatile that anyone can use it? Or is it just like that, just like you said it, all of these things that you mentioned are universal and it doesn't matter if an NGO uses them or someone privately uses them or they use it in Poland, in America, wherever. Is it like this?
Yeah. And one great thing about this whole field is that it is quite level in many ways. If you have a decent internet connection, you have as much access to this information as everyone else. Very few of the tools we use are paid for. So most of this stuff is accessible freely to a general person. And I would say the tools that we do pay for are kind of really like for in-depth investigations that I think the vast majority of people won't be interested in. One thing that's really useful is the way we work is very collaborative. So you don't have to have one person who knows every single thing about a topic. You can have someone who's, for example, really good at tracking aircraft or marine traffic, for example, and they could collaborate with someone who's maybe much better at doing geolocation or different kind of searching. So when you have all those little bits of knowledge being able to come together in a certain space, it can have a really powerful effect. And it doesn't have to be that you have to have people who are really interested in a particular topic. Often we see people who are engaging because it's more of a puzzle to solve for them. And then being able to draw on that can, be really, really powerful when you're looking at complex investigations.
Yeah, it's I get this feeling that it's like a community of detectives, really, people joining in and fighting for the same goal to, just make little pieces matter to the big picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really one great example of that is last year there was an oil spill off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and no one was really interested in investigating that in the traditional media. But on our Discord server, there were a small group of people who came together and started looking at various elements of the story, such as no one was able to identify the vessel that was involved. So that was their first task. So you had people who had experience with marine traffic, satellite imagery analysis. We were able to help contribute with up-to-date satellite imagery from Planet Labs. And we worked with the people on the Discord server who were just volunteers to produce an article. So they had a byline on Bellingcat, which was, very good for them. They were able to have that work published. But because we have this community, people saw that and then they jumped on the conversation to start adding more and digging into, for example, financial records, boat registrations, and that allowed us to do even more reporting on it. And again, that led to more people coming onto the Discord server and we were able to do a third report. And that had a huge impact in the understanding and the response to it. It allowed, for example, the UN's Marine Insurance Agency to actually understand what had happened based off the work we were publishing. Local media had front page reports on this, so it was informing the public. The government in Trinidad and Tobago were having debates in Parliament about this because they now had this evidence that pointed very clearly in a certain direction. So it can have a really huge impact from something that was really just a bunch of people coming together on the internet and trying to figure out a problem and solve it.
Yeah, that's what the internet was intended for. I guess people coming together, not coming apart.
Yeah.
What about NGOs? Can NGOs profit? I mean, in this example, the environmental NGOs can profit because of the information gathered, but any other NGO examples or maybe something that is going to happen in the future?
I mean, there's a huge amount of organizations who can benefit from this, and we've worked with a lot of organizations in the past. Collaboration is really important for us, both with our community, but also all kinds of organizations. So another good example is we were working with a Dutch NGO called Lighthouse Reports, who focuses a lot on migrant issues, and we're examining border pushbacks in the Mediterranean. And we collaborated with them, Spiegel, other news organizations to do an investigation that really drew on each of our specializations, both in terms of how we investigate and do our journalism, but also in the audiences that we reach, because we all have different audiences and different languages, and that allows for real impact to happen. In fact, with this one, it led to the resignation of the head of Frontex. So finding that collaborative work for me is really, really important. And open source investigation can be applied to a huge range of different fields. I've investigated everything from chemical weapons attacks in Syria to dog kidnappings in the UK. So you can use this on a whole range of topics.
Thank you very much. Keep up the good work. We're all here, I think, big fans of what you're doing and what you're showing to the world that the internet can be used for.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dziękujemy Państwu bardzo za uwagę. Czas nas goni. Państwa i moim gościem był Eliot Higgins, reprezentujący Bellingcat, jeden z założycieli Bellingcata. Proszę wchodzić na stronę, zerknąć we wszystkie narzędzia, które udostępniają i w artykuły, które prezentują. A teraz sektor 3.0 w formie festiwalowej i online'owej jedzie dalej.